Captain, we have them! We've established Transporter Lock, the Star Trek Discovery podcast. Join Ken and Sabriel each week as they explore strange new episodes, seek out new plots and new characters, and boldly go where no podcast has gone before.
Hello and welcome to Transporter Lock episode number 60 for October 10th, 2020. I'm your co-host, Chief Engineer Ken Gagney.
And I am Captain Sabriel Maston. Welcome back. It feels like we haven't been here for about 2 months.
It's true. We recorded that episode in August when Lower Decks debuted, the first Star Trek animated series in decades. We reviewed the pilot episode, and we didn't feel the need to review every individual weekly half-hour episode. But now we're here at the end of season 1, and we're here to recap the first season of Lower Decks.
Yeah, so back then we were kind of on this. I don't think any of us hated it. We were just kind of on this.
I would agree with that. When the episode debuted, you and I and our friend Joe all talked about it, and we're like, yeah, it's okay. We don't see any reason to not keep watching, but we acknowledge that first seasons are rough, first episodes especially are rough, and we're going to give it the benefit of the doubt. How did that pan out for you, Sabriel?
In the end, I actually started to enjoy the show. There's a very short version of it. How about you, before we expand on it?
I really enjoyed it. I got to the point where I was looking forward to each episode, and I don't know if I necessarily found it laugh out loud funny, but it was definitely entertaining and amusing, and I was engaged.
Yeah, like I just said, I started really liking them, but however, 3 times during the short season here, I realized I had forgotten that it was Thursday, New Trek Thursday, and so I didn't watch the episode until afternoon or evening, when my normal tradition is to watch it in the early morning.
I know. I saw you tweet when episode 8 came out by 7:30 a.m. my time. You'd already watched it. And then there were other times where you were like, oh yeah, that's today, isn't it? So has it been so long since Picard ended that we forgot there was new Star Trek? Or was this show just that immemorable?
I'd say immemorable, but it just wasn't that much to... I wasn't sitting here building up that excitement for weeks, months, years for this show like the other one. In the past, I was like, all right, this seems like it might be neat. But yeah, even now, even when I started to enjoy it, I kept forgetting that it aired. So it's just like, maybe that does say something about its memorability.
There weren't times that I forgot the show was on, but there were times where I was like, oh yeah, it came out today. I have other things I'm doing. I'll watch it in a few days. And there was one moment where I actually had a backlog and I watched 2 episodes back to back. And I just, wanted to watch them. But if it was Picard, if it was Discovery, I actually book those into my calendar and people know that I'm busy those nights because there's a new episode out. With Lower Decks, I'm just like, I'll get to it.
Yeah, this is Ken time. Even when we were in Boston for PAX East, we made time during the conference to go watch Star Trek Picard.
That's right. The episode, there was one year where it came out on a Thursday, and I think you and I were watching it together. And then last year, or this year, 2020, we waited till Saturday night because that's when the friends we wanted to watch it with were available and when the PAX East schedule allowed us to. But yeah, you're right. We set time aside that was devoted just to Star Trek, whereas Lower Decks, I enjoyed it, but it was more like when I have time, when there's nothing else going on.
So during the course of the season, I guested on the Nerd Party Network's SETI Alpha 3 podcast and talked about an episode. And they were very meh on the show too at that point. I'm curious what their thoughts are at the end of the season as well. One of the questions they asked me that I didn't have an answer to was, who do you think this show was for? When you go to pitch the show, there's usually a target demographic that you're after. I didn't have an answer.
Well, I think that ties into a different question that I want to answer today, which was, when was the show at its best? And for me, the show was at its best when the 4 main characters were stand-ins for the audience. I loved it when they were debating Star Trek trivia amongst themselves. Like when they were saying who was the best villain of all time, and Mariner says, oh, it's obviously Khan. He was a space seed. and Boimler was this minor character from one episode of TNG. And I'm like, nobody is going to get that except those who have been around for a really long time. I love this.
And there was another R.
Right. I had to go to Memory Alpha to remember who that even was.
The only reason I remember that name because a lot of these characters have cards in the Star Trek card game, so some of them have just permanently stuck in my memory as someone I could play.
That's awesome. There was another moment where they were talking about attractive characters. Again, Khan, and Tendi says, "Oh, I would love to stick around and talk about his thick chest, but I got to go pee." If you turn on the subtitles, they spelled it THICC. Which is the correct spelling.
I forgot about that.
But then also somebody else says, I think they were talking about Khan, and they said, "Oh, he was a Kirk Sunday with Trip Tucker sprinkles." And I was like, "Oh my God, that is delightful. I love that."
In the first episode, and even in the recap, I made comments like this show is basically Star Trek the references. Not too unlike like Spaceballs, the toilet paper, or Spaceballs, the flamethrower. And sometimes it was like, okay, I get it. You really like Star Trek. And other times like, okay, that was done really well. And like the examples you showed, I remember like laughing, like, oh my God. Where like, I didn't care if they referenced some tool they used in episode 3 of TNG. But one of those moments, those character moments when they reference a person, I think I usually enjoyed those more. When the show is at its best for me is, like all 4 characters are riffing off each other, or, doing something together. Cause there's a lot of times where they were separate doing their own storylines or subplots. But I really liked, I guess when it was I was going to keep answering other questions you had posited before recording. So I'm going to just tone that answer back and just say, I think the moments when they were working together and bouncing off each other, were some of the best. I mean, there was sure a few moments here and there when there was paired off where it was funny, but the 4 of them as an ensemble worked best to me.
Yeah, I agree with that. Except I find that more often they were split up into 2 pairs and into a foursome. It was very often Mariner and Boimler were working off each other, and then we had Tendi and Rutherford. And there were exceptions, like the time that Tendi's dog and the phasing Boimler went to the vacation planet or whatever. But primarily it was those 2 pairings that happened. And I like the chemistry in those pairs. Like, I'm still trying to figure out if Rutherford has a crush on Tendi. Like when he introduced her to Badgie, he said, "I know the program wasn't ready for her, but look at her. She's just so cute."
Yeah, I think there's supposed to be some implied things, especially with that finale. That was the other podcast too. One of them was like, "Give me more Rutherford and give him a pairing." I can see that those 2 did seem to play off each other very well.
Yeah, and Boimler and Mariner, I think the show is primarily about them. Like they're usually the A plot, and Tendi and Rutherford are the B plot. And I like those 2 characters, but they seem, all 4 characters in a degree are caricatures of actual Star Trek people. Not that there are actual Star Trek people, but how many times, like there were at least 2 different episodes where we saw Mariner get promoted and her intentionally sabotage herself because she didn't want to be promoted. I got that after the first time. They didn't need to do a second episode about it.
You see, now that you mentioned it, I guess that didn't bug me. I didn't really think about it until you pointed it out, but they did do that a few times.
Yeah, there was the time when she got promoted to lieutenant because her mom wanted to force her to transfer. And then there was the time where she became the XO for her old friend who was captain. And both times she was like, "Nope, not going to do it. I don't want this role."
Something I was positing halfway through the series because I was having trouble with it is I wasn't sure if it considered itself I don't say Monster of the Week type show, even if there wasn't a monster. Was the no continuity, or if there was going to be a continuous storyline. And by the end, there kind of was. But halfway through, I still wasn't sure.
Yeah, the first 9 episodes, I would say, were pretty independent of each other. It wasn't until episode 10 where we see the return of Badgie, for example. And I don't think that there was any other moments in the season where you had to watch them in a specific order.
Right. Like there might be one string, very loose thread in each episode, but it's very loose. I suppose maybe that's where the show might have been at some of its worst, was I wasn't sure what it was trying to be. And that was giving me some disconnect at the beginning, because every episode seemed like it was trying to be some kind of thread story, but in practice it wasn't until much later into the season. And that was some confusion for me, maybe I've just gotten too used to like Discovery or Picard, where it is a continuous story, just assumed to be, and I just haven't gotten used to the old style, or I'm not used to the old style anymore.
Between the end of season 1 of Picard and the beginning of season 1 of Lower Decks, I watched season 2 of the Orville, and maybe that got me back into the mindset of these bottle episodes, because there are things that carry throughout the seasons. Like even in TNG, like Worf's standing in the Klingon Empire was an ongoing thread. But other than that, you really could watch them out of order. And so I was okay with Lower Decks doing that. I wasn't necessarily looking for a specific plot to be advanced week to week. I was looking to learn about the characters more and to get to know them better. And I think I did do that. I think each character had different opportunities to demonstrate who they were. Like in the penultimate episode, Crisis Point, we're in the holodeck, and you and I in our last episode of Transporter Lock were like, we think she's Orion, but I don't think that was explicitly said in the episode. And then in Crisis Point, she's like, very clearly she's Orion, and she does not cotton to the racial stereotype that they're all pirates. And I think that's an important thing to know about a person.
Yeah, for sure. I did get a kick of that. Like, we're not all, like most of us are, but not all of us. Was there anything that felt weak for you during this season? I kind of shared mine.
Well, that same episode, Crisis Point, I talked about how we got to know Mariner across the season and how she doesn't like authority. And in that episode, she worked through some of her angst in the holodeck, which is a great place to do that. But the way she did it was by recreating people she knows and loves and killing them. And that seemed, I don't know if I'm using this word clinically accurately, psychotic to me. Like, I can't imagine myself doing that. Like, yes, I would recreate real people in the holodeck in order to role play myself through some scenarios and work out how I would respond to the real person. But I wouldn't resort to that level of gratuitous violence against somebody I know. I mean, imagine if Riker and Geordi and Troy had walked in on Barclay torturing avatars of themselves. He wouldn't have just had a stern talking to. He probably would have been like court-martialed.
I think this is one of those things where it works in a cartoon, but not in the real show. Because Barclay was having fantasies about the crew members, and it was very creepy and weird. In the animated show, it doesn't come off as such, probably because of that, the 2D effect of it, the animated effect of it. It's very clear that some things go on in there, and Star Trek really hasn't posited too much or questioned too much if you recreate someone who actually exists. They did it a few times, but they didn't, other than that Barclay episode, they didn't really talk about the ethical nature of that too much.
That's true, and we can only imagine the extent to which Barclay used those avatars. But to actually see it in this episode, it goes back to, I think, to something that you and Joe and I were talking about, which was in the pilot episode, with one exception. The entire episode was feasible within what we know about Star Trek lore. Like, everything that happened in that episode, if played more seriously, could have happened in a live action show. And I feel like as Lower Decks progressed, we saw that less often. And I could not see Crisis Point, the episode, happening live action, no matter how you play it.
Oh, that was so meta with the movie references and everything.
Oh my God, yes. Like how they spent 10 minutes just floating around the outside of the ship, observing it and all the lens flares. That was so the motion picture.
Uh-huh.
And then they had Spock's torpedo shell at the end, and how Da Vinci killed Mariner when she popped out. And that was so Spock. It was great.
you're jumping to one of my favorite episodes already, but quick comment before I move on. Then, I was thinking as you were talking about the first episode, I don't remember if I mentioned it then, but Star Trek did do a zombie episode. It was in Enterprise when they went to the Expanse. Was that?
Yeah, the type. Yeah.
I was making sure I wasn't confusing it with the TV show. They went to the Expanse and they found a ship of Vulcans who turned just basically the equivalent of zombies thanks to their Trellium D.
You're right. I forgot about that.
They didn't barf out black goo in Ecor, but it was a similar concept. It's like, I didn't think about that. Or if I did, I've forgotten about it since 2 months ago when we talked about it.
And this goes back to something I DM'd you on Twitter, which was how Star Trek should be able to occupy different genres, which is what Lower Decks is demonstrating. You don't have to be serious. You can also be funny in the same setting. And I mentioned to you, it'd be great to see like a horror or some sort of a like Tales from the Crypt or Twilight Zone anthology series of Star Trek. And that's kind of what that episode you're talking about of Enterprise did.
It does. Now I'm thinking like the Foreign Face episode, and some of those episodes probably wouldn't work because they've been to those planets.
Speaking of having been to planets, this is a brief aside. I loved in the finale when Commander Ransom said, "Man, it's so weird revisiting planets from the TOS era."
Yes.
And I'm like, I did a little double take. I'm like, yeah, that makes. Wait, what? He's like, oh, those old scientists. I love that. All right. I'm sorry. I think you were going to talk about your favorite episode, or was I misremembering?
Well, it's a good place to, whatever I was talking about, I think that's a good way to transition to it. Actually, I don't know if I have which of the two is my favorite, but Crisis Point, the next finale, and No Small Parts were my favorite episodes. And so that covers both my favorite scene and my favorite episode here. I loved the whole movie bit where they were just totally, completely 8,000% meta. And I think the whole taking forever to go around the Cerritos was my favorite scene. And then the lens flare and whatnot. But then all these little references like ducking out of the way of the credits while they're just talking to each other, ducking. Or the end when they're signing their names like they did at the end of like in Star Trek 6. And all those little references like, oh yes, this is great. But then like I also cheered so hard when the Titan appeared in the finale. And it was actually Jonathan Frakes and Marina Sirtis doing their voices to their characters. Like, this is a ship I've only read about, and here it is on screen.
I wondered if he was going to show up because when they answered the distress call...
They also referenced the Titan, and then Captain was like, no, we're going to take care of this one. And so when she mentioned the Titan there, I was like, oh, it's a cool little reference. And all of a sudden here it appears at the end of the episode. I didn't expect it. I just heard a reference to it, and all of a sudden here it is.
However, this does mean that the first season finale of Picard and the first season finale of Lower Decks both were dependent on Commander Riker showing up and saving the day.
I'm okay with this. He get his time. He saved the Enterprise countless times. He can save Picard and crew, and also the Cerritos. I'm okay with this.
I was very surprised when it was the Pakleds that showed up because the setup for that scene was very reminiscent of Star Trek XI, the first J.J. Abrams movie in the Kelvin universe. So much so that when the Cerritos warped in, I almost expected to see R2-D2 bouncing off their saucer.
I was looking for that too. And then when they start calling everything the Enterprise, I lost it once we found out who it is.
Well, when they came on the view screen, even before he took off his helmet, I'm like, that sounds like a Pakled. And it was. Oh my gosh. If only Geordi had been there.
Can I make a quick aside that's related? Years and years ago, back in the MySpace days, I don't remember how, but someone who played a Pakled in Next Generation, I got to talking to someone who played one, like grabbed a log or something like that, and he was a really nice guy. He loved his little role in the Star Trek universe. I don't think he did any acting besides that episode, and I could be mistaking that part though. It's been a while, and I had a friend who was very, very took this top 8 feature of MySpace very personally. And so one time I put the Pakled up there. And that meant there was not enough space for this friend who took it very seriously. Because I intentionally was just kind of egging him on. I put the Packlet ahead of him, and he was so pissed.
Well, one of the original Packlets, played by Christopher Collins, who also played a Klingon, Captain Kargan, in 2 episodes of TNG. Also in DS9, he played a couple of characters. But what I most remember Christopher Collins for is he played in the 1980s, in some cartoons, Cobra Commander and Starscream.
No way.
G.I. Joe and Transformers. That was him. One of the original Packlets. Yep.
That's awesome. I did not know that.
Same guy. One thing about that finale that was very different in tone for me, like right in the very opening, an entire ship is destroyed with all hands lost. And later on in the episode, we lose the Cerritos' chief of security, which is a named character. I think that's the only episode in the series where characters die. Or if they do, it's in a non-humorous capacity.
Yeah, I mean, other shows, characters have died, but they always had a way to replace them. I guess that could be here. Someone's never dead in Star Trek until they are. But you're right.
Yeah, it opened with a very different tone. I was like, oh, this is serious. This is not Tendi bouncing in and saying, look, I invented a dog. This is the entire ship trying to go to warp and exploding as a result. And then it goes to the opening sequence.
I did like the opening, though, where like... Don't put your shoes on the new carpet. Who ripped the film off my console? And then, oh, boom, the Packlets are here. But
it reminded me of Captain John Harriman. It's like, oh, that's going to be installed on Tuesday. The ship is too new.
Oh, Bueller.
Did you have a favorite character of the four? The four being Beckett Mariner, Brad Boimler, Devana Tendi, and Sam Rutherford?
I think I like, wow, I'm drawing, right when I started talking, her name escaped. But no,
the cat doctor,
Mariner.
Okay,
Mariner. But I still did like the Doctor too. But I think out of the main four, Mariner, I think, was still my favorite. She typically had an idea of what was going on. She was grounded is a strong word, but she was the one who I just always knew what was going on, and I like that about her. Boimler was kind of annoying to me, especially the first half of the show. And I think Tendi and Rutherford would have been more favorites, but they were minor characters out of the four. And I wish we could see more of them.
I would agree with that. Yeah. Rutherford I found very interesting. I would like to know more about the nature of his implant, where he can actually download information and change his personality. I don't know what sort of technology that is. But I think of the four, you're right. Mariner always had a plan. She was the person you call in a pinch, and she figures out how to get things done. But I think I'm most related to Tendi because I really appreciate her enthusiasm. Like there was a moment in the last episode where that XCOM, she says, wow, now that the XCOM can do that, I guess there's no need for me. This is great. Or when Rutherford loses his memory, Tendi's like, this means we get to become best friends all over again.
Yes. You mentioned Tendi. I'm glad they did not touch upon the whole Orion women are very enticing to the males of any species. They didn't touch that at all, and I appreciate it.
Huh. You're right. They didn't. And that is a good call.
Like they did not, they even did it in Star Trek 2009 to an extent. But it was a roommate of Uhura.
Right.
But here, nothing. Not mentioned once. They mentioned the stereotype that the Orions have, but that was it. They didn't talk about that feature, quote unquote, at all. And I like it.
Yeah, and unlike, say, 7 of 9 or Deanna Troi, they allowed Tendi to wear an actual Starfleet uniform.
Oh my gosh. And those two even look better in uniforms themselves, but they never let them do it.
I agree. And I think maybe Lower Decks has finally figured that out.
Yes.
I do have to agree, though, that I think the standout character outside of the top 4 was the cat doctor.
Yeah, the whole combination of Crusher and Pulaski, and I'm here for it. When I was younger, I did not like the Pulaski character at all. But as I've gotten older, I very much appreciated her, and turned out to be one of my favorite doctors in Star Trek.
Even if she didn't respect how to pronounce Data's name?
That was also in my head here. I wasn't going to bring it up. I mean, we all have our flaws. Except for you and me.
Right.
But most people have flaws.
That's right.
And that was her. She couldn't say Data.
I think my favorite moment for the Cat Doctor, and there were several good ones, but in that last episode where they rush in, you know where I'm going. They bring the captain in, she's bleeding, and the cat shrieks, and then she says, sorry, I mean, get her to the med bay. I'm like, were you speaking the wrong language there? What was that? See, we're laughing. The show's doing its job.
Yeah. There was more laughs from me as the show went on, and I don't know if that was more me accepting it, me getting used to it, me just finding the actual humor. But yeah.
Yeah, I think we both agree that the show found its way. I mean, there are still questions that we may not be able to answer, like who is the show for, but regardless of who the show's for, it definitely got better as the season went on.
Yeah. I see positive in this question as well, and I was thinking about it for like the last day since you shared this doc or so. I don't have an answer, but is there anything you're looking forward to season 2?
I'm confused where season 2 is going to go because, I mean, Boimler said it in that last episode, Mariner, you're my best friend. I don't want you to go to Sacramento and leave me. And then Boimler goes to the Hood and he leaves. So
Didn't you go to the Titan?
Sorry, what'd I say?
A Hood.
You're right.
Okay, I want to make sure I got it right too. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're right. I'll re-record. And then he goes to the Titan. So that pair is split up now. So are they writing Boimler off, or kind of like Worf in the TNG movies? Are they just going to keep finding reasons to bring him back? Does this mean that Riker and Troy are going to be regulars next season? I have no idea how they're going to make this work.
I suspect that in the first 5 minutes or first episode, they will all be stuck together on whatever ship they are going to be serving on in season 2, whether it be a transfer or accident, or we all got stuck going on Delta Quadrant duty, and or we all got teleported to the past together, and it's gonna be something like Archer, where they have theme seasons.
Or speaking of Archer, maybe they're all going to go into the holodeck where Riker was at the end of the final episode. Boy, that Enterprise, it's been a long road. However, at first I thought that was a tie-in to the Enterprise series finale, but it wasn't the same thing because that took place during Pegasus.
Right. That was very different.
So apparently, even after Pegasus, that was still a favorite holodeck program of Riker's. So weird.
Hey, I mean, you have your heroes, and you want to see what they were doing.
I guess. Why can't he just go to the Alamo like normal people? Or kayaking. Or play James Bond.
Or James Bond. Yep.
Well, but you said you don't have many thoughts and theories about season 2 other than what you just proposed to my question?
Yeah, I really tried to think about it. And other than maybe, like I mentioned before, some kind of more of a connection between episodes. I don't know if it even has to be one continuous thread or one continuous storyline. But like I mentioned, I think that was part of some of my confusion or hesitation towards the beginning, a part of it, because there wasn't any or much of connectivity between them.
I think it's okay for multiple formats of Star Trek to be simultaneously being produced, because that's one of the scratches that the Orville itches for me, or one of the itches that it scratches. Because like I love the serial nature of Discovery and Picard, but I also miss the bottle episode of nature of TNG. And I'm like, oh, with Orville and Discovery, I can have my cake and eat it too. So maybe I don't even need Orville anymore now that I have Lower Decks.
You know, I don't know if I missed the bottle episode.
Huh.
It's just been so long. When you said it here, maybe think about it. Like, ever since Star Trek, the old ones, went off the air, and we have digital ways to watch them, I've just watched them on Netflix as they come out, or in order. So maybe I'm just gotten very used to the online model of Star Trek. And Lower Decks doesn't need for me to have a connecting tissue to enjoy it. I feel like if they're going to do it, I feel like they would put a few more in. But if not, make it so. Make it a little more obvious. I don't know. Like, I didn't hate it this way. I just, like I said, it got like it more over time, but
One thing I would like to see in season 2 is with the rebooted movies, especially the first two, even the actors said they sometimes felt like they were treading familiar ground. Like, oh, the second Star Trek movie has to have Khan as a villain. That's a big surprise. And when they said, what are you going to do for the third movie? They said, something original, we hope. And yet, for season 2 of Lower Decks, I actually want to see more tie-ins to Star Trek lore. I love the cameos in this first season. You and I both loved it when Q showed up.
yes.
When's the last time, has Q ever shown up and not been the focus of an episode?
No, because he always had like the Q and the Gray and the Q-less and the Cupid and all these episodes.
Yeah, one episode of DS9, 3 of Voyager, multiples in TNG, and it was always about him. And here he was just, John Delancey just playing his role for like less than a minute, and it was hilarious.
And here he was just a reference because apparently he goes and bugs random ships in Starfleet. And then at the end, he's like sitting there in his judge chair making like, oh, come on, play along. To the Lower Decks crew. I
know, I loved it. That kind of stuff, as somebody who has been watching Star Trek for years and years, I love it. Now, I understand that with Big Bang Theory, for example, sometimes they just make references and they call that a joke, even though there's no real punchline. And that makes you feel like you're almost laughing at them instead of with them. But with Lower Decks, I love, I've seen all 700 plus episodes of Star Trek. And when they show something that rewards that, I really like those inside jokes.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And this is the only show or at least recent show, that I haven't watched episodes twice before talking about them. So I wonder if I go back to the earlier ones, having liked the later ones, if my attitude towards those will have changed.
I did consider going back and watching the pilot episode again before talking to you today, since that's the last episode we reviewed and we weren't crazy about it. I was wondering if my opinion would have changed, but I didn't. And it's not a big commitment. I was just talking to somebody on Twitter who's like, oh, I wonder if I can binge Lower Decks before Discovery Season 3 begins. And I was like, it's a pretty minimal commitment. It's like under 4 hours of content.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts about Lower Decks before we wrap up with some other Star Trek trivia?
No, other than, I'm glad that I was able to find some joy in it by the end here.
Yeah, I'm glad this show exists, and I am glad I watched it, and I would watch another season.
Yeah, here we go. Here you go, CBS. You made it so I will pay you again.
Dang it. So, there has been some other Star Trek news. Back in July at San Diego Comic-Con, which I think was virtual, they announced that the other animated series that they're working on for Nickelodeon, which you and I have talked about on Transporter Lock, is going to be called Star Trek Prodigy. And I think you and I either missed that announcement or we heard it and then just forgot until this week when they announced that Star Trek Prodigy is going to feature Captain Janeway.
Yeah, our reactions were Star Trek what?
Right. We should have been excited over Kate Mulgrew coming back, but we were like, wait, she's coming to what?
So, no, it's really cool. I'm glad to see her reprise her role beyond her Admiral appearance in Star Trek Nemesis.
Yeah, I think Kate Mulgrew tweeted that Captain Janeway was coming back, and I wonder if that was intentional, because you're right, by the end of the TNG movie series, it was Admiral Janeway.
I didn't think of it that way, the wording. I feel like people just know her as Captain Janeway. Like, people know Picard as Captain Picard, even if he was an Admiral by the end. We still know him as Captain Picard.
It's true. I just pulled up the Wikipedia page for Catherine Janeway. Now, I didn't read the full announcement about her appearance in Prodigy. I assumed it was just going to be like a cameo like Jonathan Frakes was in Picard or whatever. But Wikipedia says Janeway, voiced by Mulgrew, will lead the upcoming animated television series Star Trek Prodigy.
Oh.
Because I thought Star Trek Prodigy was about a bunch of younger people who find an abandoned ship and use it to have adventures around the galaxy. And so I thought that's who the main characters are going to be, but it's about Kate Mulgrew? Captain Janeway.
It's going to be about a woman named Kate Mulgrew who helped the Millennium Tower get built.
That's true. So yeah, I don't know what that's going to be about. But also, in the meantime, we have season 3 of Discovery is starting next week. That's mid-October, October 15th. And the opening scene is already available on YouTube. Have you watched it? Because I have not.
I have not either. And maybe I will tonight, but because to me, it's not really too much of a spoiler. I know the basic premise of season 3, where I think you have intentionally avoided
I have
that. So I'm not going to say anything. So maybe I will watch this and let you know if it's quote unquote safe or not. If they jump right into the premise of it, or if it's more like, hey, the gang's back.
Okay, because I know there's a trailer for season 3, and I haven't watched that either.
Okay. Well, probably not safe for you, but I will give it a shot and let you know.
Thank you. In the meantime, I'm getting my fix by reading the book The Last Best Hope, which is Star Trek Picard #1. It's the first novel based on that series. It came out in February of this year, so just as the show itself was airing. And have you read this book?
I haven't. Is this the one that talks about events before the show?
Correct. So I didn't know that going in. You are absolutely correct. It is entirely, at least the parts that I've read so far, I'm about 18% in. It's about the effort to save the Romulans from the supernova.
Gotcha.
So it starts off with Captain Picard being called to Starfleet headquarters and being asked, will you lead this mission? And he says yes. And they say, congratulations, Admiral. And he's like, oh, guess I'm not going back to the Enterprise. Okay. And then Geordi transfers off the Enterprise to help him build ships and robots on Mars. And the new captain of the Enterprise is Worf, who was his #1 after Riker left to captain the Titan. And then Geordi goes to the Daystrom Institute to recruit Bruce Maddox to build robots with him. And it's all this stuff. So I'm not sure how I feel about it for a couple of reasons. One, we kind of know how it ends. And second of all, the author, Una McCormack, has written other Star Trek novels, some of which I've read in the DS9 series, but I don't feel like she quite has the characterizations down. Picard more so, but I feel like when I'm reading Geordi's dialogue, I can't imagine those words coming out of Geordi's mouth.
One of those situations. And yeah, that's tough when you have an author who doesn't quite, I don't know how to get it, doesn't quite get it right. I mean, if I was reading a fanfic where Korra wasn't talking like Korra would from Legend of Korra, it would feel off. Like, that's clearly not her. This is someone pretending to be her.
Yeah, and it can be hard to get it right for somebody who has so many decades of content written about and for him. I mean, this is not a blank slate that you can devise your own dialogue for. This is something that needs to be consistent, and it isn't always. But again, I'm less than a quarter of the way through the book, so I'm certainly going to finish it. It's one of the better books I've read in the last few months, although that says more about what I've been reading.
So, to be determined.
Right. So that's all I got going on in the Star Trek universe. Anything else going on with you, Bree?
I want a quick note here before we wrap things up.
Yeah.
I don't remember if I mentioned it last week or last episode or not, but the Delta Flyers, the podcast by Garrett Wang and Robert Duncan McNeil, where they are rewatching Voyager and talking about their experiences on these episodes, what they remember, what they thought worked, what they thought could have been way better. And I am loving the hell out of this podcast.
Yeah, this is Tom Paris and Harry Kim from Voyager, and it's been 20 years since they played those roles, which is remarkable. And here they are talking about their memories from very specific episodes. And it's impressive how detailed they are about some things.
Yeah, like sometimes they go in like, I couldn't tell you what this episode is about until I started watching it. Like, oh. But one of the things that stuck out before me, and I'll let you go, is that I mentioned how they were not allowed to go off script, at least the beginning of the show. I don't know if it changed later on. So like when you hear how awkward it is when Tom Paris says, "It's the Voyager," instead of what we would say is just, "It's Voyager." They were like, "No, you will say the script as is." And so now we know why sometimes the actors said things in a little off way that sounded funny, because they were told, "Nope, you read what's written. Well written."
Yeah, it's disappointing. You can never tell if it's bad acting or bad scripts. And I know a lot of people will blame the actors in those cases, but you don't always know what they were given to work with.
Yeah, it's hard to know. And what director? Apparently, some of these directors were, woo.
Yeah.
And some they obviously loved a lot and knew how to get things out of the people. So if you're not listening to this, I highly recommend checking out. The first episode or two is a little rough because they're still getting their footing, like any podcast. But as they go on, it gets much smoother and they have the whole shtick down, and it's really, really enjoyable.
Cool. I will include a link to that in the show notes, and as well as a link to the other podcast that you were a guest on, which I confess, I missed that episode. So I want to go back and listen to that as well.
Yeah, I will give you a link when we're done here so you can link in the link.
Fantastic. I'm sure the main character from The Legend of Zelda will appreciate that. So that is it for episode number 60 of Star Trek Lower Decks. We're going to be back recording every week that Discovery Season 3 is on. Is that correct?
That's correct, unless something happens like a super pandemic.
Oh no, it can't get worse, can it? And the answer is always yes.
Yes.
It's going to be a tumultuous fourth quarter of this calendar year. And also, Discovery Season 3 debuts 2 days before my next move. I'm a digital nomad. I move around every couple of months. I've been in Arizona for the last 10 weeks fostering dogs from Best Friends in Kanab, Utah. And next week, next Friday, I'm bringing back my 5th foster dog. The other 4 all got adopted. Phoebe, I'm going to bring back to the rescue. And then I'm going to continue north to Bend, Oregon, where I'll be for 5 weeks before moving to Portland, Oregon for the holidays. So we need to watch Discovery Season 1, record this podcast, get it published so I can pack up everything I own into my car, move across the country, and then be in a different time zone for the next episode of Transporter Lock.
If something happens where you have to push yourself, well, we can make it not push yourself.
I think the main trick will just be navigating the time zones because you're not going anywhere.
I am, but I don't think it's going to change much for us.
Oh, we'll figure that out off the air then.
Okay.
All right.
Well, then, until next time, I'm going to let you close out. Otherwise, this is backwards.
No, I don't know how to close it out. I've never closed it out. Until next time.
Hit it, or punch it, or engage.
Love it.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on iTunes and keep your hailing frequencies open by following us on Twitter @TransporterLock or subscribing to our podcast and email newsletter at transporterlock.com. Oh, shoot. Train of thought. Can I hold it? Get figured out in 5 seconds? Well, no. No, it's gone. Oh, I remember. Aha, thankfully.